You're a liar. And people like you don't get penthouse access. The words didn't echo. They cut, sharp and deliberate, across the polished marble lobby as every quiet conversation died mid-sentence. Naomi Carter stood at the front desk, still as glass, her expression unreadable, her presence somehow louder than the accusation thrown at her. She wore a simple black blouse, tailored slacks, nothing designer, nothing loud, and yet every eye in the room drifted toward her like gravity had shifted. The clerk behind the desk, a young white woman with a tight smile and sharper tone, held Naomi's card between two fingers as if it didn't belong in her hand. "This doesn't match," she added, louder now, making sure the nearby guests heard every syllable. A man by the elevators paused mid-step. A couple near the lounge leaned in closer. Somewhere, a phone camera quietly lifted. Naomi didn't reach for the card. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move at all, because she had seen this before. Different building, different faces, same tone, same assumption. The air thickened, not with chaos, but with something heavier, judgment settling into place. "Ma'am, if you can't verify your identity, we'll have to ask you to leave," the clerk continued, now emboldened, now performing. Naomi tilted her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the words, but not enough to validate them. Her silence wasn't empty. It was controlled, measured, intentional. Behind the desk, another employee leaned over, whispering just loud enough. "She doesn't look like money." A soft chuckle followed. It didn't travel far, but it didn't need to. It landed exactly where it was meant to. And Naomi heard it. She always did. Across the lobby, a junior staff member glanced nervously at the screen, eyes flicking between the reservation system and Naomi's face. Something not adding up, something not right, but hesitation held her in place. Then the shift came. A door opened behind the desk and the manager stepped out, mid-40s, confident stride, authority worn like a uniform. He didn't ask questions. He didn't check the system. He looked at Naomi once, then at the clerk, and made a decision. "We don't tolerate fraud here," he said, loud enough to claim the room. The word fraud hung in the air like a verdict. A few guests exchanged looks. One shook his head. Another lifted a phone higher. The moment stretched, tight and fragile. Naomi finally moved. Not forward, not back, just enough to reach into her coat pocket. Her phone appeared in her hand, sleek, silent, deliberate. She glanced at the screen, then back at the manager, her voice calm, almost too calm. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi. The manager scoffed, mistaking composure for weakness. "Security is on the way," he added, doubling down, locking the moment in place. Naomi's eyes didn't flinch. Not once. She lifted the phone slightly, thumb hovering for just a second longer than necessary. Then she spoke, quiet enough that only the front desk heard it, but strong enough that it didn't need volume. "Go ahead," she said. "Make the call." And just like that, the room stopped feeling like a lobby. It felt like something else entirely. Like a line had been crossed, and something far bigger had just begun. The manager's words did not settle the room. They sharpened it, like tension pulled too tight across glass. And still Naomi Carter did not move. Not even when the faint sound of a radio crackled somewhere behind the walls, signaling that security had been alerted. She stood there, centered, composed, her phone resting lightly in her hand, her gaze steady on the man who had just labeled her without a second thought. Around her, the lobby began to shift in subtle ways. A woman near the seating area crossed her arms, watching more closely now. A man in a navy blazer shook his head under his breath. The junior employee behind the desk glanced again at the screen, this time longer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if the truth was sitting right there waiting to be acknowledged. "Sir," she whispered toward the manager, her voice uncertain but trying to find footing. "The name, it is in the system." The manager did not even look at her. "Then it is the wrong system," he replied quickly, dismissing both her and the possibility with the same breath. The clerk beside him smirked again, encouraged, doubling down on the narrative they had already chosen. "We see this all the time," she said, louder now, performing for the room. "People come in with copied reservations, fake cards, thinking they can just walk into executive spaces. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The word fake lingered, heavy and pointed. Naomi's eyes flicked briefly toward the junior employee, just for a second, long enough to recognize the hesitation there, the quiet awareness that something was off, but not yet strong enough to speak against authority. Naomi understood that look. She had worn it once herself. Years ago. Different building. Same silence. The manager stepped closer to the desk, placing both hands on the marble surface as if anchoring control. "We are giving you one last chance to leave voluntarily," he said, his voice lower now, but no less firm, the kind of tone meant to sound reasonable while leaving no room for dignity. "Otherwise, we escalate this." The word escalate echoed differently this time. It was no longer a warning. It was a decision already made. Naomi inhaled slowly, the kind of breath that did not show on the outside, but shifted everything internally. For a brief moment, the lobby around her faded. Not gone, just distant. In its place came a memory. A younger version of herself, standing in a smaller lobby, holding a folder too tightly, being told there were no available rooms despite a confirmed reservation. She remembered the way people had looked through her then. Not at her. Through her. That version of her had left quietly. This version did not. The present snapped back into place. The marble, the lights, the eyes watching. Naomi's grip on her phone adjusted slightly, her thumb finally pressing the screen. A call connected almost instantly. "It is happening," she said calmly, her voice even, controlled, impossible to read from the outside. On the other end, a voice responded without hesitation, efficient and ready. "Understood. Do you want to initiate verification?" "Protocol." Naomi's eyes lifted, meeting the managers again, this time with something different behind them. Not anger, not frustration, something sharper, something final. "Yes," she replied quietly. "Initiate it now." The junior employee's eyes widened just a fraction. The manager frowned, sensing the shift but not yet understanding it. Around them, the lobby held its breath. Because something had just changed. Not in volume, not in motion, but in control. And no one behind that desk realized yet that they had already lost it. The moment the call connected, something invisible began to move beneath the surface, like a current shifting under still water, and Naomi Carter felt it before anyone else did, because she knew exactly what she had just set in motion, even if the room did not. The manager straightened slightly, his confidence not gone but unsettled, like someone who could sense a change in temperature but could not yet see the source. "Who are you calling?" he asked, his tone sharper now, less controlled than before. Naomi did not answer him directly. She did not owe him that. Instead, she lowered her phone just enough, her posture unchanged, her calm intact, as if the question itself had no weight. Behind the desk, the junior employee could not ignore it anymore. Her eyes moved rapidly across the screen, scrolling, checking, rechecking, her breathing just a little faster now. "Sir," she said again, this time louder, the hesitation cracking. "The profile, it is flagged executive level." The words landed softly but carried far. The clerk beside her froze for half a second, then scoffed, trying to recover control. "That does not mean anything," she said quickly. "People hack systems all the time." But her voice lacked the same certainty it had moments ago. The manager finally turned his head toward the screen, just for a glance, just enough to acknowledge it, but not enough to accept it. "Ignore it," he said firmly, doubling down again, because pulling back now would mean admitting something he was not ready to face. "We follow procedure." Procedure. The words sounded hollow now. Around them, the atmosphere had shifted again. The whispers were no longer quiet. A man near the entrance spoke under his breath. "This does not feel right." A woman near the seating area nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on Naomi, not with doubt, but with growing recognition of something else, something stronger than what the front desk was projecting. Naomi stood in the center of it all, unmoved, her presence no longer passive but commanding in a way that did not need volume. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. A message, then another, then a third. The system was responding. Fast. Efficient. Exactly as designed. She glanced down briefly, just enough to confirm what she already knew. Access logs were being pulled. Internal records were being flagged. Every word spoken in the last few minutes was now part of something much larger than this lobby. The manager noticed the movement, his eyes narrowing. "You think a phone call changes anything?" he said, trying to reclaim ground, trying to make the moment smaller again. Naomi finally looked directly at him, fully this time, her gaze steady, unflinching, and something in it made him pause, just for a fraction of a second. "No," she said quietly. "Not a phone call." She let the silence stretch, just long enough to land. "A record." The words settled differently. He did not respond immediately. He could not. Because now, for the first time, there was doubt. Not loud, not obvious, but there. Behind the desk, the junior employee took a small step back from the screen, her hand covering her mouth slightly as realization began to take shape. The clerk shifted her weight, her confidence slipping in small, almost invisible ways. And then it happened. A soft chime echoed from the system terminal. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The screen refreshed on its own. The junior employee stared at it, eyes widening. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "The system just updated." The manager turned fully this time, his attention finally pulled where it should have been from the beginning. "What do you mean updated?" he demanded. She swallowed, her eyes still locked on the screen. "Her profile, it is not just executive." She hesitated, as if saying it out loud would make it. "Irreversible. It is owner-level clearance." The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Everything changed, and Naomi Carter did not move. The word owner did not echo. It settled, heavy and undeniable, pressing into the room with a weight no one could ignore. And for the first time since Naomi Carter stepped into the lobby, the balance shifted completely. The manager's posture stiffened, his confidence no longer steady but cracking at the edges, his eyes locked on the screen, as if it might correct itself if he stared long enough. "That is not possible," he said, but the words came out thinner than before, less like authority and more like hope. The junior employee did not respond right away. She could not. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard again, not searching anymore, just confirming what was already there. "It is verified," she said finally, her voice steadier now, not because she felt safe, but because the truth had removed the need for hesitation. Full ownership access. Corporate override attached. The clerk took a step back, her earlier confidence evaporating in small, visible fractures. "There has to be a mistake," she muttered, but she did not reach for the keyboard. She did not challenge the system again, because now it was no longer just a possibility. It was fact. Around them, the lobby reacted in a quiet wave. A man near the elevators let out a low breath, shaking his head slowly. The woman who had been watching from the seating area lowered her arms, her expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to understanding. Phones that had been raised for spectacle were now held steady for something else entirely. Recognition. Naomi remained exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her calm unbroken, but the space around her had transformed. She was no longer standing in the middle of their judgment. They were standing inside her reality. The manager turned back to her, slower this time, his movements no longer sharp, his voice no longer certain. "Ma'am," he started, the word catching awkwardly, unfamiliar now, as if it belonged to a different version of him that had not existed 5 minutes ago. Naomi did not respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, not as punishment, but as clarity. Every second now belonged to truth, not assumption. Her phone buzzed again in her hand, a soft vibration that only she seemed to notice, but its impact reached far beyond the device itself. Another update. Another layer. Internal systems were locking in. Reports were compiling. Access points were shifting quietly in the background. The structure they thought they controlled was already responding to her. The manager glanced toward the screen again, then back at Naomi, his voice lowering further. "If there has been a misunderstanding," he tried, the sentence forming slowly, carefully, as if choosing the right words might undo what had already been done. Naomi finally moved, just a step forward, closing the distance between them, not aggressively, not confrontationally, but with a precision that made the moment impossible to ignore. "There was no misunderstanding," she said, her voice calm, even, but carrying more authority than anything spoken in the room so far. The clerk looked down. The junior employee stood still, her eyes fixed on Naomi now, not with fear, but with a quiet respect forming in real time. The manager swallowed, his earlier certainty gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. Accountability. And then Naomi tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady, her words measured. You made a decision, she continued. Before you checked, before you asked, before you thought. Each phrase landed clean, deliberate, impossible to deflect. The lobby held its breath again, but this time it was not tension. It was anticipation, because everyone in that room could feel it now. This was not the end of the moment. It was the beginning of something much bigger. And Naomi Carter had not even revealed the full weight of it yet. The silence after Naomi Carter's words did not fade. It deepened, stretching across the lobby like a held breath that no one dared release. And in that stillness, every detail became sharper, every glance more deliberate, every shift in posture impossible to hide. The manager stood there, caught between what he had believed just minutes ago and what was now undeniable in front of him. His authority no longer something he controlled, but something slipping quietly through his fingers. Behind the desk, the junior employee straightened slightly, no longer shrinking back, her eyes moving from the screen to Naomi with a new kind of focus, one that carried both realization and something else, something closer to courage. The clerk, however, clung to the last fragments of certainty she had left, her voice rising just enough to try to reclaim ground that was already gone. Even if that is true, she said, forcing the words out, you still caused a disruption. The statement landed awkwardly, out of place in a moment that had clearly moved beyond her control. A few guests exchanged looks, the kind that did not need words to communicate what they were thinking. Naomi turned her gaze slightly toward the clerk, not sharply, not with anger, but with a clarity that made the attempt sound smaller than it was intended to be. A disruption, Naomi repeated softly, as if testing the word for weight. Then she shook her head once, subtle, precise. No, she said. What you saw was a reaction to your assumption. The difference settled instantly. Around the room, the energy shifted again, not in volume, but in alignment. The narrative was no longer being set by the front desk. It had already moved beyond them. The manager exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just a fraction, the first visible sign that he understood the position he was now in. We can correct this, he said, his tone changing, softer, careful, as if stepping onto uncertain ground. If there has been any inconvenience, we will make it right. The words sounded practiced, familiar, the kind of response designed for complaints, for small issues, for moments that could be smoothed over and forgotten. But this was not that kind of moment. Naomi's expression did not change. You cannot correct what you have already revealed, she replied, her voice calm, steady, leaving no space for interpretation. The manager's jaw tightened slightly, not in defiance, but in recognition. Because he understood now. This was no longer about a room, or a reservation, or a misunderstanding. This was about judgment made too quickly and too confidently. Naomi's phone buzzed again, longer this time, a sequence of notifications stacking one after another, each one silent but significant. She glanced down briefly, confirming what had already begun. Internal review had escalated. Timestamps were locked. Employee actions were being cross-referenced in real time. The system was not just observing anymore. It was responding. The junior employee took another small step forward, her voice quieter but no longer uncertain. Ma'am, she said, addressing Naomi directly for the first time. Do you want me to pull up your full profile? Naomi looked at her, really looked this time, and gave a slight nod. Not as a command, as acknowledgement. The employee turned back to the screen, her movements more confident now, her fingers moving quickly, deliberately. The monitor refreshed again, this time revealing more than just access level. Corporate identifiers, ownership structure, oversight permissions that extended far beyond this single building. The clerk leaned closer despite herself, her eyes scanning the information, her earlier certainty dissolving completely. The manager did not need to look again. He already knew. And in that moment, as the truth stood fully visible between them, Naomi Carter spoke once more, her voice still calm, still controlled, but carrying a finality that settled over the entire lobby. This was never about access, she said. It was about how quickly you decided I did not belong. And this time, no one in the room tried to argue. The weight of Naomi Carter's words did not leave the room. It settled deeper, pressing into every corner of the lobby until even the smallest movement felt deliberate. And for a moment no one spoke, not because they had nothing to say, but because they were finally listening. The manager stood there, his earlier authority now replaced with something quieter, something far less comfortable, as if the ground beneath him had shifted and he was only just realizing how unstable it had been all along. Behind the desk, the screen still displayed Naomi's full profile, glowing with a clarity that could not be dismissed. Every line of data reinforcing what the room now understood, but the staff had failed to see. Ownership, control, oversight. It was all there, undeniable. The clerk swallowed, her hands no longer resting confidently on the counter, but drawn slightly inward, her posture shrinking in ways she could not control. She glanced at the manager, searching for direction, for reassurance, but he had none left to give. The junior employee, however, did not look away. She remained focused on Naomi, her expression no longer uncertain, but resolute, as if witnessing this moment had shifted something in her permanently. Naomi took another small step forward, not to close distance aggressively, but to claim space that had always been hers, her presence now fully aligned with the truth that had surfaced. Her phone buzzed again, a steady rhythm of updates continuing in the background, each one marking progress in a system far more precise than the assumptions that had filled this lobby minutes earlier. She lifted her eyes, scanning the room briefly, acknowledging the people who had watched, who had questioned, who had felt the shift even before it was confirmed. Then she returned her attention to the front desk. "You said you follow procedure," she began, her voice calm, measured, each word placed with intention. The manager nodded slightly, almost reflexively, though the confidence behind the gesture was gone. Naomi continued, "Procedure is not just what you do when everything looks right. It is what you do when something challenges your expectation." The sentence landed clean, without force, but with impact that did not require volume. The junior employee lowered her gaze for a moment, not in shame, but in reflection, understanding the difference now in a way that could not be undone. The clerk shifted again, her earlier comments echoing back at her in silence, louder now than when she first said them. The manager exhaled slowly, his voice quieter when he spoke again. "You are right," he said, the admission careful, incomplete, but real. Naomi did not interrupt him. She let him finish. "We should have handled this differently." The words hung there, fragile, as if they might be enough to close the moment. But Naomi's expression remained unchanged. "Should have," she repeated softly. Then she shook her head once, precise, final. "That moment has passed." The lobby absorbed that truth instantly. Because this was no longer about what should have been done. It was about what had been done. Naomi's phone vibrated again, longer this time, signaling a shift from observation to action. She glanced at the screen, reading quickly, confirming silently. The internal review had escalated to executive oversight. Decisions were no longer pending. They were being made. She lifted her gaze once more, meeting the manager's eyes directly, and for the first time since this began, there was no distance left between what he saw and what was real. "You made your decision in less than 30 seconds, she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "Now the system will take the same amount of time to respond." The implication did not need explanation. The manager's expression tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in understanding. Because he could feel it now. The shift was complete. Control had never been his. It had only looked that way until now. The moment after Naomi Carter spoke, the room did not react with noise. It reacted with stillness, the kind that comes when everyone realizes something irreversible is already in motion. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the front desk was no longer the center of control. It was the center of consequence. The manager's eyes flicked briefly toward the terminal, then back to Naomi, as if searching for a signal that this could still be contained, that this could still be resolved quietly, but nothing in her expression offered that reassurance. Behind the desk, the system chimed again, a sharper tone this time, followed by a series of notifications appearing one after another across the screen, each one small on its own, but together forming something undeniable. The junior employee leaned in, reading quickly, her lips parting slightly as she processed what was unfolding in real time. "Sir," she began, her voice steadier now, not hesitant anymore, but urgent in a different way. The manager turned toward her fully, no longer ignoring the screen, no longer able to dismiss it. "What is it?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer would not help him. She swallowed once, then spoke clearly. Corporate compliance has logged the incident. The words landed with precision. Not dramatic, not loud, but final. The clerk's shoulders tensed, her eyes darting to the screen, then to the manager, then back again, as if hoping there was still a version of this where it could be undone. But the system did not pause. It continued. Another notification appeared. Then another. Timestamps. Audio capture flags. Internal review escalation. Every second of the last few minutes was no longer just a moment. It was now a record. Naomi stood there, watching none of it directly, because she did not need to. She knew exactly how it worked. She had built parts of it herself. The manager took a slow step back from the desk, the first physical sign that his position had shifted from authority to exposure. "This is unnecessary," he said, though the statement sounded more like a request than a command. Naomi's gaze remained steady. "No," she replied quietly. "This is accurate." The difference between those two words hung in the air, separating intention from reality. Around them, the lobby had fully changed. No one was whispering anymore. No one was pretending this was a simple misunderstanding. The people watching were no longer observers. They were witnesses. The junior employee's hands moved again, navigating the system as new prompts appeared, each one requiring acknowledgement, each one documenting actions taken, responses given, decisions made. Her breathing was steady now, focused, as if she understood that what she did next mattered beyond this moment. The clerk shifted again, her voice lower this time, stripped of its earlier sharpness. "We did not know," she said, almost to herself, almost as if that could still explain something. Naomi heard it. She always did. She turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the statement. "That is exactly the problem," she said. The words did not accuse. They clarified. The manager closed his eyes. Briefly, then opened them again, the weight of the situation settling fully now. "What happens next?" he asked, the question no longer framed by control, but by consequence. Naomi looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a calm certainty that made the answer feel inevitable before she even spoke. Her phone vibrated once more, a single, distinct pulse. She glanced down, read the message, then lifted her eyes again. "Now," she said, her voice steady, measured. "The system responds." And as if on cue, the terminal behind the desk refreshed again, this time not just displaying information, but issuing directives. The moment had moved beyond conversation. It had become action, and everyone in the room knew it. The screen did not just refresh, it changed tone, the interface shifting from passive display to active command. And in that instant, the lobby no longer felt like a place of service. It felt like a system waking up. The junior employee stared at the terminal, her fingers frozen just above the keyboard as new lines of text appeared one after another, structured, precise, unmistakably corporate in authority. "Action required," she read quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but every word carried. The manager stepped closer again despite himself, drawn back in by the gravity of what was unfolding, his earlier instinct to control now replaced by a need to understand. "Read it," he said, not sharply, not forcefully, but urgently. She nodded once, eyes scanning, then spoke clearly, each word landing heavier than the last. "Immediate review of front desk conduct. Temporary suspension of access privileges pending investigation." The clerk's breath caught audibly, her hand instinctively reaching toward her terminal, but before she could touch anything, the screen in front of her dimmed slightly, then locked. A soft tone confirmed it. "Access denied." She froze. Not because it was loud, because it was final. The manager turned to his own terminal, attempting to override, to regain something, anything, but the same sequence followed. A pause, a flicker, then the same result. Locked. The system was no longer responding to them. It was responding to her. Naomi Carter did not move during any of it. She did not step forward. She did not step back. She simply stood there, centered in the moment as it unfolded exactly as expected. Her phone vibrated again, but this time she did not check it immediately. She let the room absorb what was happening first. Around her, the energy had shifted completely. The guests who had once watched with curiosity were now watching with clarity. A man near the entrance gave a slow nod, as if something had just been confirmed beyond doubt. A woman near the seating area lowered her phone, no longer recording for spectacle, but witnessing something real. The junior employee stepped back from the terminal, her hands lowering slowly to her sides, her eyes moving from the screen to Naomi, and in that look there was no fear, only recognition. The clerk, however, struggled to hold on to something, anything, her voice quieter now, strained. This cannot happen without approval, she said, though the words lacked conviction even as she spoke them. Naomi turned her gaze toward her, calm, steady, unshaken. It already has, she replied. The simplicity of the statement left no space for argument. The manager exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping further, the last visible sign of resistance fading. What does this mean? He asked, not to Naomi alone, but to the moment itself. Naomi finally glanced down at her phone, reading the latest update, her expression unchanged, then lifted her eyes again. It means the system has moved from observation to enforcement, she said, her voice even, precise. The words did not need explanation. The room understood. Behind the desk, another notification appeared on the central screen, larger this time, impossible to ignore. Corporate oversight engaged. The junior employee read it silently, her lips pressing together as she processed the weight of it. The clerk looked away. The manager did not. He stared at the words, as if they were a mirror he could not step away from. Naomi took a single step forward, closing the space just enough to make her presence undeniable. You asked what happens next, she said, her tone calm, but carrying something deeper now. Something final. She paused, just long enough for the room to feel it. This is what happens. And in that moment, no one behind the desk questioned her again. The words settled, but the system did not pause. It continued to move with a quiet precision that felt almost surgical. And for the first time, the people behind the desk were no longer reacting to Naomi Carter. They were reacting to something much larger than her presence, something they could not interrupt or redirect. The central terminal flickered again, not erratic, not unstable, but deliberate, like a door unlocking from the inside. The junior employee leaned forward instinctively, her eyes scanning the new directive that had just appeared, her voice steady but carrying the weight of what she was reading. Employee access audit in progress, she said, each word clear, each one final. The manager did not speak right away. He did not try to override. He did not reach for control, because now he understood that this was no longer a situation he could manage. This was a process he had triggered. The clerk took a small step back from her station, her hands now completely still, as if touching anything might make it worse. This is going too far, she said quietly, but there was no conviction left in her voice, only the realization that the line had already been crossed minutes ago. Naomi stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, but the room now oriented itself around her differently. She was no longer being evaluated. She was the standard by which everything in that moment was being measured. Her phone buzzed again, a longer vibration this time, signaling a deeper layer of escalation. She glanced down briefly, confirming the update, then lifted her gaze again, her voice calm when she spoke. It is not going too far, she said. It is going exactly where it was always supposed to go. The manager closed his eyes for a brief second, absorbing that, then opened them again, the last trace of resistance gone. What does the audit include? He asked, his tone no longer defensive, but careful, almost cautious. The junior employee answered before Naomi could, her focus still on the screen. Timestamps, communication logs, access patterns, and verbal interaction flags, she said, her voice tightening slightly on the last phrase. The implication was immediate. Everything that had been said, every assumption, every word spoken without verification. It was all there now. Recorded, structured, unavoidable. A quiet murmur moved through the lobby, not loud, not chaotic, but unified in understanding. The people watching were no longer guessing. They knew exactly what this meant. The clerk looked toward the manager again, her voice lower now, almost uncertain. Can we respond to it? She asked. He hesitated, then shook his head slowly. Not like this, he said. And that answer said everything. Naomi took a slow step forward, just enough to stand directly in front of the desk, her presence now fully aligned with the authority the system had already recognized. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You had a chance to respond earlier, she said, her tone even, her words precise. Before the system needed to. The junior employee looked up at her, that same quiet recognition in her eyes, now mixed with something else, something closer to respect. The clerk looked down. The manager said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that could change what had already been set in motion. Another notification appeared on the central screen, larger this time, highlighted in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Preliminary findings confirmed. The junior employee read it silently, her lips pressing together as the final layer of uncertainty disappeared. The manager exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering as if the weight had finally settled fully on him. Naomi's phone buzzed once more. She read the message, then lifted her eyes again, her voice calm, but carrying a finality that left no room for interpretation. It is done, she said. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood that what had just happened could not be undone, only answered for. The words, "it is done," did not end the moment. They defined it, drawing a clear line between what had happened and what would follow, and for a brief second the entire lobby existed inside that line, suspended, silent, waiting. The manager did not move. The clerk did not speak. Even the quiet hum of the building seemed to fade, as if the space itself was acknowledging the shift. Then Naomi Carter lifted her chin slightly, her gaze steady, her presence no longer just calm, but absolute. "You called me a liar," she said, her voice even, measured, but carrying through the room with a clarity that made every word land exactly where it needed to. No one interrupted. No one looked away. "Not because you verified anything," she continued. "Not because the system failed, but because I did not match what you expected." The manager's expression tightened, not in denial, but in recognition, because there was no defense left for that truth. The clerk lowered her eyes, her earlier confidence now replaced by the quiet weight of what she had said, what she had assumed, what she could not take back. Naomi took one more step forward, closing the final distance between herself and the desk, her voice still calm, still controlled, but now carrying the full authority of everything that had just unfolded. "You did not question the data," she said. "You questioned me." The sentence settled heavily, separating fact from bias in a way that could not be ignored. Around them, the guests stood still, not out of shock anymore, but out of understanding, as if they were witnessing something larger than a single interaction. Naomi's phone buzzed once more, but she did not look at it this time. She already knew what it contained. Instead, she kept her focus on the people in front of her, the ones who had made a decision in seconds that the system had now answered in full. "Let me be clear," she said, her tone sharpening just slightly, not louder, but firmer, like a line being drawn with precision. This was not a misunderstanding. The manager swallowed, his posture shifting again, no longer trying to hold authority, but bracing for what came next. The junior employee stood still, her eyes fixed on Naomi, her expression steady, absorbing every word. Naomi paused, just long enough for the room to feel the weight of what she was about to say. Then she delivered it. Clean, direct, undeniable. This was a decision. The word landed like a final verdict. The clerk's shoulders dropped. The manager closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, the reality now fully settled in. Naomi's gaze did not waver. "And now," she continued, her voice calm, but carrying a finality that left no room for negotiation, "I am making mine." The air in the lobby shifted again, not with tension, but with inevitability. Because everyone in that room understood exactly what that meant, even before she said the next words. Naomi's phone vibrated once more, a single confirmation, and this time she glanced down, just for a moment, then back up. Her expression did not change. It did not need to. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice steady, controlled, absolute. "Your access to this system, this desk, and this operation is terminated." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They carried the full weight of authority, of ownership, of consequence. Behind the desk, the terminal confirmed it instantly, another soft tone, another lock, another line drawn in a system that did not hesitate. The manager stood frozen. The clerk did not move. The junior employee inhaled slowly, understanding fully what had just happened. And Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, calm, composed, and undeniable, as the room shifted completely around her. The confirmation tone from the system did not fade. It lingered, soft but unmistakable, like a signature placed at the bottom of a decision that could not be reversed. And in that moment, the lobby no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like a line had been drawn, and only one side still held authority. The manager stood there, unmoving, his hands no longer resting on the desk, no longer attempting to control anything, as if the structure he had relied on had quietly stepped away from him. The clerk's eyes remained lowered, her earlier words echoing back in the silence, louder now than when she had first spoken them, because now they had context, consequence, and no place to hide. The junior employee looked between them, then back to Naomi Carter, her posture straighter, her presence no longer hesitant, as if witnessing this moment had reshaped something fundamental in how she understood her role. Around the room, the guests shifted again, but this time it was not subtle. A man near the entrance nodded once, slow and deliberate. A woman near the seating area let out a quiet breath, not of tension, but of release, as if something that had been wrong had finally been corrected. The energy had changed completely. It was no longer about what had happened. It was about what it revealed. Naomi remained still for a moment longer, allowing the weight of the decision to settle fully, not rushed, not dramatized, but acknowledged. Then she turned slightly, her gaze moving across the front desk, not avoiding anyone, not targeting anyone, simply seeing clearly. This was never about one interaction, she said, her voice calm, steady, carrying across the room without effort. The manager lifted his head slightly, listening, because now there was nothing else he could do. It was about a pattern, Naomi continued, each word measured, deliberate. A pattern of deciding who belongs before you verify who they are. The statement did not accuse one person. It addressed the system they had become part of without question. The junior employee's eyes lowered briefly, not in guilt, but in recognition, as if she could see the larger picture now, beyond just this moment. The clerk shifted her weight again, her earlier certainty replaced by something quieter, something closer to reflection. Naomi's phone buzzed once more, but she ignored it. The system no longer needed her attention. It was already moving. Instead, she focused on the people in front of her, the ones who had just experienced the consequences of their assumptions in real time. You thought you were protecting standards, she said, her tone even, not harsh, not raised, but impossible to dismiss. But standards are not built on assumptions. They are built on discipline. The word discipline settled differently. It did not carry emotion. It carried expectation. The manager nodded slightly, almost involuntarily, because he understood that now. Too late, but clearly. Naomi took a small step back, not retreating, but resetting the space, her presence no longer confronting, but defining. And discipline requires one thing above all else, she added. The room held still again, waiting. Control, she said. The word landed with quiet force. Not control over others. Control over judgment. Control over reaction. Control over bias before it becomes action. The junior employee lifted her eyes again, that same steady focus returning, but stronger now, anchored by understanding. The clerk did not speak. The manager did not interrupt, because this was no longer a moment to defend. It was a moment to absorb. Naomi let the silence follow her words, not empty, but full, giving them space to settle where they needed to. And as she stood there, calm, composed, and entirely in command without raising her voice once, it became clear to everyone watching that the real shift had not been in the system. It had been in the standard, and Naomi Carter had just reset it in front of all of them. The shift in the room was no longer subtle. It was complete, undeniable, like a current that had changed direction and taken everything with it. And for the first time since Naomi Carter walked in, no one was questioning what they were witnessing. They were accepting it. The front desk, once a place of control, now stood quiet, its screens locked, its authority removed not with noise but with precision, and the people behind it stood in a space that no longer belonged to them. The manager adjusted his stance slightly, not to regain composure, but to hold what remained of it, his voice low when he finally spoke. What happens to us now? It was not a challenge. It was not resistance. It was a question rooted in consequence. Naomi looked at him for a moment, not rushed, not dismissive, but deliberate, as if weighing not the answer, but the understanding behind it. Around them, the guests remained still, not out of tension, but out of respect for the moment as it unfolded, because this was no longer just a scene, it was a statement. Naomi's phone vibrated again, a final sequence of confirmations arriving, each one marking the completion of a process that had already reshaped the outcome. She glanced down, briefly, then back up, her expression unchanged, her voice calm when she answered. "Now," she said, "the review becomes permanent." The words landed with quiet authority. The junior employee inhaled slowly, her eyes moving back to the system, where a final update appeared across the main display. Status: active personnel reassignment pending. She read it silently, but the meaning was clear. This was not temporary. This was not a warning. This was restructuring in real time. The clerk closed her eyes briefly, the last trace of resistance dissolving into acceptance, because there was nothing left to hold on to except the reality in front of her. The manager nodded once, slowly, as if the weight had fully settled, his earlier certainty replaced by a clarity that came too late to change anything. Naomi stepped slightly to the side, not removing herself from the moment, but allowing the space to open again, her presence no longer confronting, but defining the standard that had just been enforced. "This is not about punishment," she said, her tone even, measured, but carrying a depth that reached beyond the immediate moment. "It is about alignment." The word carried differently. It was not emotional. It was structural. It meant that what had happened here was not isolated. It was part of something larger that required correction. The junior employee looked up again, her expression steady, absorbing the meaning, not just of the action, but of the expectation moving forward. Naomi continued, her voice calm, controlled, but firm. "Every system reflects the people who operate it," she said. And today, this system responded exactly as it should. The manager lowered his gaze slightly, understanding fully now that the system had not failed. It had revealed. The clerk remained still, her earlier words now distant, replaced by the quiet recognition of what they had exposed. Naomi paused, letting the room settle into that truth, not rushing it, not softening it, but allowing it to exist as it was. Then she added one final sentence, her voice steady, her presence unwavering. "The only question that matters now is whether you learn from it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of meaning, of reflection, of consequence understood not through force, but through clarity. And as Naomi Carter stood there, composed and unshaken, it became clear that the outcome was not just a result of power, but of principle, applied without hesitation, without noise, and without apology. The lobby did not return to normal. It settled into something new, something quieter but stronger, like a space that had just been reset without anyone raising their voice. And Naomi Carter stood at the center of it, not as someone who had taken control, but as someone who had revealed where it truly belonged. The screens behind the desk remained locked, the system no longer waiting for input, because it had already completed its task, and the people who once operated it now stood outside of it, not removed by force, but by the weight of their own decisions. The manager remained still, his earlier confidence replaced by a silence that carried understanding, not just of what had happened, but of why it had happened. The clerk stood beside him, her posture no longer rigid, no longer defensive, but reflective, as if replaying every word she had spoken and finally hearing them clearly. The junior employee, however, stood differently now, her shoulders steady, her gaze focused, as if something inside her had shifted from hesitation to awareness, from watching to understanding. Around them, the guests began to move again, slowly, not rushing, not breaking the moment, but carrying it with them, as if they knew they had witnessed something that did not need applause to be powerful. Naomi took a slow breath, not out of relief, not out of tension, but as a natural pause, a transition from action to presence. She glanced once more at the desk, at the screens, at the people, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. Then she spoke, her voice calm, steady, final. "I did not need to raise my voice," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the full weight of everything that had just unfolded. The manager looked up slightly, listening, because now every word mattered. Naomi continued, her tone unchanged, controlled, deliberate. "I did not need to prove anything in this room. She paused, just long enough for the meaning to settle. The system did that for me. The statement landed with quiet authority, not as a victory, but as a truth that could not be undone. The junior employee nodded once, almost instinctively, as if recognizing that the power in that moment had never been about force, but about structure, discipline, and control applied at the right time. Naomi shifted her stance slightly, preparing to leave, not because she was finished, but because she had already completed what she came to do long before anyone realized it. She took one step forward, then another, her movement unhurried, her presence still commanding even as she began to walk away. As she passed the desk, she stopped for just a second, not turning fully, but enough to leave one final line behind, her voice low, but clear enough to carry across the space. "You did not lose your position because I walked in," she said. "You lost it the moment you decided I did not belong." The words did not linger. They settled. Final. Complete. Naomi Carter continued walking, her steps steady, her presence leaving the lobby without taking anything with her, because she had not come to take, she had come to reveal. Behind her, the room did not erupt. It did not react loudly. It held the moment, absorbed it, carried it forward. The manager remained still. The clerk said nothing. The junior employee stood a little taller. And the system, silent and precise, remained exactly as it should be. Because in the end, nothing had been broken. It had simply been exposed. And that was enough.